Hello and welcome. I am Raziel, and so today I want to talk about sci-fi war games versus fantasy war games. Now, I've made it no secret that I prefer science fiction over fantasy in media, in films, video games, wargaming, pretty much every aspect of my life. I've been into Star Wars since I was very little. When I first saw them on TV, it was right after Top of the Pops played, I think it's called At the Fun House was the band, and the song was It's Got to Be Perfect. It's the first time I watched it. That just shows you how old I am. Anyway, so here's the thing. I'm not a big fan of fantasy. I know it sounds weird. I've never really enjoyed Lord of the Rings, the book. I actually quite like Silmarillion though. Maybe because it's more of a textbook, it's far more historical than the story driven of Lord of the Rings. That just might be it. And so, but when it comes to science fiction, I love it. I think it's great. And I think it's absolutely fantastic. I love it because it's so wide and vast. But here's the thing which I find with fantasy, and why I'm probably very much in love with Conquest. Fantasy tends to be, in my opinion, much of a muchness. It's so full of tropes and just copied ideas that go on and on and on that we rarely see anything really different within the fantasy genre. Now, my theory behind this, so tinfoil hats on, is that it's because fantasy is, believe it or not, one of the oldest forms of genre we have. It goes back way before Tolkien. Like we got the Norse stories, we got the Celtic stories. Dragons have been in like every form of culture ever spoken, ever. So it's really old. And same with goblins, elves, fairies, dwarves. All of those things have been ingrained into our social, our society, I should say, or a social zeitgeist, because it's just so common and has been around for so long. Again, we can talk about St. George and the Dragon, Beowulf, and King Arthur. Well, there wasn't much. Oh, even King Arthur's quite a bit of fantasy in it. Like the Green Knight. But like I said, it's very much ingrained into the Western society. So when a game or medium tries to sort of sideline from it or try and split it off, it can get a lot of mixed emotions and mixed feelings about this. It can be different, but how different does it go to lose that, that fantasy feeling? So when you look at it, you can see it's fantasy. How far can you push the dwarves out of dwarvishness to be something else, but still call them dwarves? Even if you call them something like the Dracohorn. Same with the elves and every other species that you find in fantasy, orcs, etc. And now we're seeing some other tropes come into fantasy as well, more science fiction tropes. And I might be wrong, but I think this really took, hold during World of Warcraft, or Warcraft actually, when we now have different planets and there's some, it's like sci-fi elements to this. Conquest has this with the Spires. Warhammer Age of Sigmar is just full of this with different planets. Again, we have World of Warcraft and Azeroth. I forgot its name. Anyway, but we see this trope coming again and again. And I think that's the thing with fantasy, that when they do try something different and it works, we see, once again, many other companies and, franchises within fantasy just copying that once more. So it just becomes again much of a muchness. A new idea comes in, but then it gets repeated ad nauseum again and becomes part of a fantasy genre. And very, very rarely do we see anything so vastly different. Again, this is why I love Conquest. I love Conquest for this reason. It is the most different, but very fantasy at the same time. We have the dwarves, we have the orcs and goblins. I don't know, no goblins, we have the Radron, which is basically orcs, who like dinosaurs. We have dwarves, which are Draghorn. We have space elves, well, elves, which are the old spires. We have the undead, which is Romans. And we have many human factions, the 100 Kingdoms, the City States, and the Sorcerer Kings. Yep. So we still have these very firm fantasy roots with the dwarves and the orcs and the spires and undead, but it's done so differently. Rather than having skeletons running around with their shields and battered up armor, we actually have an armor and a theme that fits as well. So it's not just dead people; it's this particular group that is dead. I know Warhammer kind of does it with the Sylvaneth. No, not the Sylvaneth. Why do they with the Vampire Council, right? But then again, skeletons for the Vampire Council were kind of the same as the Tomb Kings, bar a little bit of garishness. Whereas you look at the Old Dominion and it's very different, and I like that. I think it's fantastic. See, when it comes to science fiction, we see companies really pushing the boat out with creativity, though we are starting to see some tropes and stuff like that coming into play. We have Space Marines, powered, armored, super genetic people in every game, right? This has again been something that's been really old. Starship Troopers, from the book, by the way, not the film, they were hypnotized, they wore power armor. And now we kind of see that in a lot of science fiction games. It's usually, they tend to be one of the main armies, with the Enforcers for Mantic and the Space Marines for 40k. Whereas, Wildest Exodus literally just has Nikola Tesla as his power armored dude. But science fiction does tend to try and push the boat out a little bit more. And they can add these more fantasy elements into it, like space elves and space undead and space orcs, but make them more different, and they don't have to have that fantasy feeling that goes with it, because they can really push the boat out. This is why we get a lot more interesting races, in my opinion, for science fiction than we do with fantasy. Again, a lot of fantasy, in my opinion, tends to be pretty much the same. I know the stories can be good and interesting, but again, they tend to be very much the same. Even if we look at Dragon Age, again, we see the same things. Okay, you got the Darkspawn, but you still have dragons, you still have knights. I think there's there's a type of ogre there. There's definitely a type of there's elves there, and again, the elves are the same sort of elves you see everywhere else, like wood elves. Again, it's constantly the same. And like I said, I'm not bashing fantasy. I'm just saying what I prefer one to the other. Okay, that's just basically what I'm not bashing it. And I think that's kind of what it is. It's basically the interest and the way science fiction can be far more vast and creative, where fantasy, being so old, is very, very stuck in its ways right now. Anyway, thank you very much for watching. I hope to see you all in the next video. Have a great day. And tomorrow's video is kind of a good one. I've got a good plan for tomorrow's video, and it's kind of personal at the same time. Okay, if you wish to save some money, save some money on your wargaming. There's Wayland Games down below, as there is, and you're up to 20% off and free delivery after £20. There is Forbidden Planet for comics, DVDs, mangas, etc. There's my merchandise, t-shirts, cups, stickers, and what everyone else does. There's my comics. If you want to see Little Red Riding Hood go ham on some cyborg Lovecraftian werewolves, or see a bunch of teenagers get just mutilated by a monster. 2 different ones, by the way. There's also my friend Sky at Skyforge. Give them a click. Let's get them up the algorithm. And finally, Patreon, because business. Bye bye.